I never believed in signs until I heard the sound of metal grinding against metal at 7:43 on a Tuesday morning.
Ow.
What followed was something I can only describe as the mechanical equivalent of a dying whale.
It was 3 sips into...
My coffee, standing in my kitchen wearing yesterday's work shirt and wondering why I had chosen a profession that required me to be functional before sunrise. That's when Miss Henderson's garage door decided to have what could only be called a complete nervous breakdown. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sound cut through the quiet suburban morning like a rusty chainsaw through silk. I set down my mug, grabbed my toolbox, and walked the 50 yards to her driveway. There I found a garage door that had given up on life entirely. It hung at a bizarre angle, one side completely off its track, the other desperately clinging to functionality like a person hanging from a cliff by their fingernails. That's when I saw her through the kitchen window, standing perfectly still, and shoulders rigid, staring at the mechanical disaster like it had personally insulted her family. Even from a distance, I could see the weight she carried in the way she held herself. Like someone who had been holding up the world for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to put it down. I'm Jake Morrison, 38 years old, and I fix things for a living. Not glamorous things like sports cars or yachts, but the everyday stuff that breaks when you need it most. Garage doors, fence gates, kitchen cabinets that have decided to hang sideways, washing machines that sound like they're trying to achieve flight. I've been running Morrison Repairs for 6 years now, ever since I left my job as an insurance adjuster and realized I was tired of telling people why their claims were denied when I could actually help them fix their problems instead. My business operates out of a converted garage behind my house on Maple Street in Millbrook, a town where everybody knows everybody's business. The biggest excitement usually involves someone's cat getting stuck in a tree, or the annual debate about weather. The Christmas lights downtown should be white or multicolored. It's the kind of place where people still leave their doors unlocked and wave at strangers, where the hardware store owner knows your name and your preferred brand of screws. I ended up here by accident, really. 5 years ago I was driving through on my way to somewhere else entirely when my truck broke down. While waiting for parts, I helped old Mr. Peterson fix his back gate, then somehow found myself repairing Mrs. Garcia's kitchen drawer. Before I knew it, I had more work than I could handle and a community that had quietly adopted me. Sometimes life doesn't ask permission before it changes direction. Linda Henderson had lived across the street for 3 years, but we had barely exchanged more than polite waves and comments about the weather. She was what people called a private person, the kind who kept her lawn perfectly maintained, her house painted in tasteful colors, and her personal life completely to herself. I knew she worked at the county hospital as a nurse, drove a sensible sedan, and had a garden that produced vegetables so perfect they looked like they belonged in a magazine. What I didn't know was that she had been holding her world together with willpower and determination for longer than anyone should have to, and that this morning her garage door's rebellion was about to become the crack that finally let the light in. I knocked on her front door, toolbox in hand, trying to look professional despite the fact that my hair was doing something that defied both gravity and logic. She opened it after a long pause, dressed in scrubs that suggested she was either going to work or coming from it. Her dark hair was pulled back in a way that was practical rather than stylish. Her eyes were the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. I heard the commotion, I said, nodding toward the garage. I thought you might need some help. She looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language, then glanced back at the garage as if she had forgotten it existed. Oh yes, that. She paused, seeming to gather herself. I was trying to leave for work, and it just started making this horrible noise. And then it stopped moving entirely, and now it's hanging there like some kind of mechanical art installation. I don't even know who to call, because I've never had to deal with this before, and she stopped herself, taking a breath. Sorry, it's been a morning. No problem at all. Mind if I take a look? Nodded, following me to the garage where the door hung in defeated surrender. I set down my toolbox and started examining the track system, the springs, the cables that had clearly seen better decades. The door was old, probably installed when the house was built 15 years ago. It had that particular kind of wear that comes from faithful service without proper maintenance. "When's the last time you had this serviced?" I asked, running my hand along the track where the roller had jumped completely free. "Serviced?" She looked genuinely puzzled. "I didn't. No garage doors needed servicing. It's always just worked." I nodded, understanding immediately. A lot of people don't realize. These systems need attention every few years. Lubrication, adjustment, spring tension checked. Without it, they eventually give up. Looked at the bent track, the stretched cable, the spring that had clearly been overcompensating for months. This one's been trying to tell you it needed help for a while. Something in her expression shifted, like I had said something that meant more than just garage door mechanics. She was quiet for a long moment, watching me examine the damage. "How long will it take to fix?" she asked finally. I studied the problem more carefully. The track would need to be realigned, possibly replaced. The cable had frayed and would definitely need replacement. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The springs were still functional, but showing stress. It was doable, but not quick. Honestly, about 4 hours if everything goes smoothly. We'll need to pick up a few parts from Henderson Hardware, but I can have you operational by this afternoon. She checked her phone, then looked back at the garage with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I was supposed to be at work 20 minutes ago. I've never been late to work, not once in 7 years. You should call them," I said gently. "Mechanical emergencies happen. They'll understand." She made the call, standing in her driveway in the morning sun, explaining the situation with the kind of apologetic efficiency that suggested she wasn't used to asking for accommodation. When she hung up, she looked slightly lost, like someone who had suddenly found themselves in a play without knowing their lines. "They said to take my time," she said, and there was something in her voice that suggested this was not the response she had expected. "Dr. Martinez said they could handle things without me for one morning, and that maybe I should consider it a forced day off." I started pulling tools from my kit, setting up for what I could already tell was going to be a more complex job than usual. "When's the last time you took a day off?" She was quiet for so long I thought she hadn't heard me, and softly, "I honestly can't remember." As I worked, she hovered nearby, not interfering, but clearly unable to just go inside and leave the situation in someone else's hands. I could feel her watching me examine each component, trying to understand what had gone wrong and why. There was something methodical about her attention, like someone used to diagnosing problems and finding solutions. "You're a nurse," I said, not really a question. "I see you," she confirmed. 12-hour shifts, usually 4 days a week.
Ow.
Sometimes more when they're short-staffed. That's demanding work." "It is," she paused, "but it's good work. Important work. People depend on you to be strong, to know what to do, to never fall apart even when everything around you is falling apart." I nodded, understanding more than she probably realized. Sounds like a lot of pressure. "It is," she said again. But this time there was something different in her voice. Something that sounded almost like relief at having someone acknowledge it. I had to make a trip to Henderson Hardware for parts, leaving her standing in her driveway looking oddly displaced, like someone whose routine had been so thoroughly disrupted that she didn't know what to do with herself. The hardware store was its usual Tuesday morning self, full of contractors picking up supplies and retirees working on projects that had no deadline except their own satisfaction. Bob Henderson, the owner, was a man who knew every screw bolt and washer in his store by heart and took personal pride in matching people with exactly what they needed. He looked at my list and nodded knowingly. "Linda Henderson's place?" he asked, gathering the parts with practiced efficiency. "You know about the garage door? Sound carries in this neighborhood," he said with a grin. "Plus, that door's been living on borrowed time for at least 2 years. I've been waiting for this call. She seems like she takes good care of things." Bob's expression grew more thoughtful. "Linda's the kind of person who takes care of everything and everyone except herself. Lost her husband about 4 years ago, cancer, and since then she's been like a machine. Work, Home, garden, repeat. Never stops, never complains, never asks for help. He handed me the bag of parts. Maybe a broken garage door is exactly what she needs. When I got back, I found her sitting on her front steps with a cup of coffee, still in her scrubs but looking slightly less like she was about to sprint into action at any moment. She watched me unload the parts with the same careful attention she'd given my initial diagnosis. Bob Henderson says this door's been on borrowed time, I told her, starting to disassemble the damaged track. Mr. Henderson knows about my garage door. Small town, I said simply. People notice things. She was quiet for a while, sipping her coffee and watching me work. The morning was warming up, the kind of late spring day that makes you remember why you love where you live. Birds were conducting some kind of complicated negotiation in the oak tree that shaded half her driveway. Somewhere in the distance, someone was running a lawnmower with the determined rhythm of suburban productivity. I hate asking for help, she said suddenly. I looked up from the cable I was threading through the pulley system. Most people do. No, I mean, I really hate it. I'd rather do something badly myself than ask someone else to do it right. She paused. I know. That's ridiculous. It's not ridiculous, I said, adjusting the tension on the spring. But it's probably exhausting. She laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. Everything's exhausting lately. I could have let that pass, focused on the work, maintained the professional distance that keeps customer interactions simple, and bounded. But something in her voice, the way she was sitting there in her own driveway like a visitor to her own life, made me pause. You want to talk about it? She looked at me sharply, like I'd asked something inappropriate. Then her expression softened. You don't need to hear about my problems? You're here to fix my garage door? I'm here to fix your garage door, I agreed. But I'm also a person having a conversation with another person on what's turning out to be a pretty nice Tuesday morning. She considered this, watching me work for several minutes before speaking. Again, do you ever feel like you're stuck in a life that fits perfectly, but doesn't feel like yours anymore? I stopped what I was doing and really looked at her. Actually, I do. I've been strong for so long, I don't remember what it feels like to not be strong. The words came out slowly, like she was testing each one. After David died, everyone kept telling me how amazed they were by how well I was handling everything, how strong I was, how capable, how they didn't know how I did it. She set down her coffee cup and wrapped her arms around her knees, and I became that person. Strong one. The one who handles everything. The one who works extra shifts when the hospital is short-staffed. Who brings dinner to neighbors when they're sick. Who never says no when someone needs something. I kept working, but I was listening with the kind of attention that good repair. Work requires. Sometimes the most important part of fixing something is understanding how it broke in the first place. But lately, she continued, her voice getting quieter, I feel like I'm about to break. Like I've been holding up this image of myself for so long that I've forgotten who I actually am, underneath all the strength and capability and endless responsibility. The garage door track was finally properly aligned, and I started testing the movement, making sure everything was smooth and balanced. The door moved up and down with the quiet efficiency of a system that had been properly cared for. There, I said, hitting the button one more time to watch it cycle. Good as new. Better, actually. She stood up and watched the door complete. It cycled, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Thank you, really. I don't know what I would have done. You would have figured something out, I said, packing up my tools. That's what people like you do. She was quiet for a moment, then said something that stopped me cold. I'm 53 years old, and I'm tired of being strong all the time. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Can I be weak for a while? Just for a little while. I looked at her standing there in her driveway, this woman who had been holding herself and probably half her world together through sheer force of will. And I realized that sometimes the most important repair job isn't mechanical at all. Yeah, I said simply. You can be weak for a while. That's when everything changed. Something shifted in Linda's face when I said those words. Like a dam that had been holding back years of careful control suddenly developed its first small crack. She stood there in her driveway, still in her scrubs, looking at me like I had just given her permission to breathe after holding her breath for 4 years. I should probably back up and tell you how I ended up being the kind of person who fixes more than just garage doors. My name is Jake Morrison, and I landed in Millbrook, the way most good things happen in life, completely by accident. 5 years ago, I was driving through this town on my way to a job interview in Springfield. Something corporate and soul-crushing that would have paid well and slowly killed me from the inside. My truck broke down right in front of Peterson's auto shop, and while I waited for parts, I noticed old Mr. Peterson struggling with a gate that had been hanging crooked for what looked like months. I'm not sure what made me offer to help. Maybe it was the way he was talking to that gate like it was a stubborn pet. Or maybe it was just that I couldn't sit still while someone wrestled with something I knew how to fix. Either way, I spent 2 hours realigning hinges and adjusting the latch. And by the time my truck was ready, Mr. Peterson had told half the town about the stranger who fixed his gate without being asked. That was a Tuesday. By Friday, I had repaired Mrs. Garcia's kitchen drawer that had been stuck for 3 years, helped the librarian fix a wobbly shelf, and somehow found myself with more work than I knew what to do with. I called the company in Springfield and told them I wouldn't be making the interview. 6 months later, I was running Morrison Repairs out of my garage and wondering why I'd ever thought I wanted to work in an office. The thing about fixing things for a living is that you learn to read the story behind the breakdown. A gate doesn't just start hanging crooked overnight. A garage door doesn't suddenly give up after years of faithful service. And a person doesn't just ask if they can be weak unless they've been strong for so long they've forgotten what their natural state feels like. Linda was still standing there, looking like someone who had just said something she couldn't take back and wasn't sure if she regretted it or felt relieved. I finished packing my tools, but I didn't leave. Something told me that walking away right then would be like leaving a job half-finished. "You know what's funny?" she said, sitting back down on her front steps. "I can handle medical emergencies." Without blinking, last week, I helped save a man who came in with a heart attack, worked on him for 40 minutes, got him stable, and then went home and made dinner like it was just another Tuesday. But this morning, when my garage door broke, I almost cried. I leaned against my truck, recognizing the tone of someone who needed to talk, but wasn't used to having anyone to talk to. Sometimes it's the small things that get us. The big stuff we're prepared for. It's the garage door breaking on a Tuesday morning that catches us off guard. "David used to handle all the house stuff," she said, not looking at me but staring at something in the distance. "I was always the one who dealt with medical things, school things for our daughter, social obligations. He took care of maintenance, repairs, anything that involved tools or calling service people. I never had to think about it." She picked at a loose thread on her scrubs. "When he got sick, I became responsible for everything. His care, the house, working extra shifts to cover the medical bills, making sure Emma didn't fall apart during her senior year of high school. And somehow, I just kept going. People kept telling me how strong I was, how well I was handling everything, and I guess I started believing that was who I was supposed to be. I thought about Bob Henderson's comment at the hardware store about Linda being someone who takes care of everyone except herself. Where's Emma now? College. Pre-med at State University, 3 hours away. She calls every Sunday and worries about me, which makes me feel like I need to prove I'm fine every time we talk. Linda smiled, but it was the kind of smile that was more about practice than feeling. She wants to come home sometimes, help out, but I keep telling her to focus on school. She's got her whole life ahead of her. And you don't. The question hung in the air between us. Linda looked at me like I had asked something she'd never considered before. "I'm 53, she said finally. "I work 12-hour shifts taking care of other people. I come home to a house that's too big and too quiet. I tend to garden that produces more vegetables than one person can eat. And I go to bed tired every night from a day that felt exactly like the day before." She paused. "That's not a life ahead of me. It's just more of the same." I understood that feeling more than I cared to admit. Before Millbrook, I had been living a version of that same routine, just with different details. Same office, same desk, same problems that never really got solved, just processed and filed and passed along to someone else. "What would change look like?" I asked. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I started to think she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, "I don't know. I've been so focused on just getting through each day that I haven't thought about what I actually want." A car drove by, slowly, the driver waving at both of us with the casual friendliness that small towns specialize in. Linda waved back automatically, then looked at me with something that might have been embarrassment. "I'm sorry. You came here to fix my garage door, not listen to me have some kind of midlife crisis in my driveway." "Maybe," I said, "but maybe that's not a bad thing. When was the last time you talked to someone about what you're feeling instead of what you're doing?" She considered this. "I have friends at work, but we mostly talk about work. I have neighbors, but we mostly talk about neighborhood things. I have my sister in California, but she's got her own life and problems." She shrugged. "I guess I don't really talk to anyone." That explained a lot. In my experience, people who don't talk about their feelings don't stop having them. They just store them up until something as simple as a broken garage door becomes the thing that breaks their carefully maintained composure. "You mentioned your daughter worries about you," I said. "What does she worry about?" "Everything. Whether I'm eating enough, whether I'm sleeping enough, whether I'm lonely, whether I'm taking care of myself." Linda laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. "She sent me a care package last month with tea and fancy soap, and a note that said, 'Please do something nice for yourself.' I still have the soap. Keep thinking I'll use it for a special occasion, but then I can't think of what would qualify." I thought about the way she had described her routine, the endless cycle of work and responsibility without any space for spontaneity or joy. It reminded me of a machine that had been running so long it had forgotten it was supposed to do anything besides run. "What did you like to do before?" I asked. "Before David got sick, before you became the person who handles everything." She tilted her head, like I had asked her to remember something from childhood. "We used to take weekend trips, nothing fancy, just driving to state parks or small towns we'd never been to. David would research interesting places to eat, and I would find hiking trails or farmers markets." She smiled, and this time it looked more genuine. "We had this ridiculous rule that we had to try something new every trip. Food we'd never eaten, an activity we'd never done, a road we'd never taken." That sounds nice. I felt like I was always discovering something about the world or about myself or about us. She was quiet for a moment. "I can't remember the last time I discovered anything." Right then, as if the universe had decided our conversation needed a soundtrack, Mrs. Patterson from 2 houses down came around the corner, walking what appeared to be the world's most enthusiastic golden retriever. The dog immediately spotted us and began pulling Mrs. Patterson in our direction with the single-minded determination of someone who had just found their new best friends. "Morning, Linda," Mrs. Patterson called out, clearly delighted to have an excuse to stop and chat. "Jake, heard about the garage door drama? Everything working now? Good as new?" I said, watching the dog sniff around my toolbox with scientific thoroughness. "This is Buster," Mrs. Patterson said unnecessarily, as Buster had already introduced himself by attempting to lick every surface within reach. "He's new." "My daughter thought I needed company." Linda reached down to pet Buster, who immediately decided she was the most interesting person he had ever met. "He's beautiful." "How old?" "He's 2 years old and full of opinions about everything," Mrs. Patterson said fondly. "Honestly, he's been the best thing that's happened to me in years. Forces me to get out of the house, meet people, have adventures." She grinned. "Yesterday he chased a squirrel so enthusiastically that we ended up discovering a walking trail I didn't even know existed." I watched Linda's face as Mrs. Patterson talked about adventures and discoveries, saw something flicker in her expression that looked almost like longing. "I should let you two get on with your day," Mrs. Patterson said, tugging gently on Buster's leash. "But Linda, if you ever want to walk with us, we're out here every morning around 8. Buster would love the company, and honestly, so would I." After they left, Linda sat quietly for a moment, still looking in the direction they had gone. "She seems happy," she said finally. "She does. I wonder what that feels like." The words came out so quietly I almost didn't hear them. I looked at this woman sitting on her front steps in her work clothes, surrounded by all the markers of a successful, responsible adult life, asking what happiness feels like, and I felt something shift in my chest. Maybe it was recognition. Or maybe it was just the understanding that sometimes the people who look like they have everything together are the ones who most need someone to ask if they're okay. "Linda," I said, "what are you doing this Saturday?" She looked surprised by the question. "Saturday. I usually do laundry, grocery shopping, meal prep for the week." "Why, what if you didn't do any of that? I don't understand." I wasn't entirely sure I understood either, but something was telling me that this conversation was more important than either of us had expected it to be. "What if, instead of doing laundry and grocery shopping, you did something you've never done before? Something that has nothing to do with taking care of anyone else or being responsible for anything?" She stared at me like I had suggested she rob a bank. "Like what?" "I don't know. That's the point." "What's something you've always been curious about but never had time for?" She was quiet for a long time, and I could see her thinking, maybe for the first time in years, about what she might want to do rather than what she needed to do. "There's a pottery studio downtown," she said finally. "I've driven past it probably 100 times, and I always wonder what it would be like to try making something with my hands. Something that wasn't medical or practical or necessary." She shook her head. "But that's silly. I don't know anything about pottery." "Perfect," I said. "Neither do I." She looked at me sharply. "What do you mean? Maybe we could both try something new this Saturday." "Maybe we could both be bad at pottery together," I grinned. "What's the worst that could happen? We make terrible bowls and laugh about it?" For the first time since I had met her, Linda looked genuinely surprised. Not the polite surprise of someone receiving an unexpected compliment, but the deep surprise of someone who had just been offered something they didn't know they wanted. "You want to go to pottery class with me?" "Want to go to pottery class with you," I confirmed. "And maybe afterward we can find somewhere new to eat lunch. Somewhere neither of us has been before." She sat there looking at me like I was speaking a foreign language. And I realized that for someone who had spent 4 years taking care of everyone else's needs, the idea of someone wanting to spend time with her just because they enjoyed her company might be completely foreign. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Because," I said, surprising myself with how easily the words came, "I think you're interesting, and I think you've forgotten that about yourself." Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything feel possible. I stood outside Claywork's studio at exactly 10 o'clock, holding 2 cups of coffee and wondering if Linda would actually show up. Part of me wouldn't have been surprised if she had changed her mind. It's decided that pottery with a near stranger was too far outside her comfort zone, too impractical, too risky. But at 10:02, she appeared around the corner, walking with the careful deliberation of someone who was deliberately not thinking too hard about what they were doing. She wore jeans and a sweater the color of autumn leaves, and her hair was down instead of pulled back in the practical ponytail I'd seen before. She looked nervous and determined in equal measure. "I almost didn't come," she said, accepting the coffee with grateful hands. "What changed your mind?" I realized I couldn't remember the last time I did something just because I wanted to. She looked at the studio windows where we could see people inside already working at wheels there, hands covered in clay. I lay awake last night thinking about that conversation. It's about being tired of being strong, and I kept coming back to something you said about discovering things. I nodded, understanding. Sometimes the biggest step isn't the doing. It's the deciding. We walked into the studio together, and I immediately felt like we had entered a different world. The space was warm and bright, filled with the kind of creative chaos that comes from people making things with their hands. Potters. Wheels hummed quietly, shelves displayed works in various stages of completion. And the air smelled like earth and possibility. A woman with clay-stained apron and an infectious smile approached us. "You must be Jake and Linda. I'm Sarah Chen, and I'll be your instructor today. Have either of you worked with clay before?" We both shook our heads, and Sarah's smile grew. Wider. Perfect. My favorite kind of students. No bad habits to unlearn. She led us to 2 wheels positioned side by side and began explaining the basics. How to center the clay, how to use water, how to let the wheel do most of the work, while your hands guided the shape. It sounded simple in theory. In practice, it was like trying to perform surgery while riding a bicycle. My first attempt resulted. In what could generously be called abstract art, the clay wobbled violently, refused to center, and eventually collapsed into something that looked like it had been attacked by a small tornado. Linda's first attempt wasn't much better, but she approached it with the same methodical focus I had seen her use when examining my garage door repair. "It's fighting me," she said, laughing as her clay slumped to one side. "Clay doesn't fight," Sarah said, adjusting Linda's hand position. "It responds. If you're tense, it feels that. If you're forcing it, it resists. The trick is to work with it, not against it." I watched Linda's face as Sarah spoke, saw something click into place. She took a deep breath, relaxed her shoulders, and tried again. This time, the clay began to respond, rising slowly under her hands into something that actually resembled a bowl. "There you go," Sarah said encouragingly. "Feel how it wants to move." For the next hour, we worked in comfortable concentration. Linda proved to be a natural, her steady hands and patient temperament well suited to the demands of the wheel. I was more of a disaster, but a cheerful one. Every collapsed bowl was met with laughter rather than frustration, and gradually began to understand what Sarah meant about working with the clay instead of fighting it. "This is harder than it looks," I said, watching Linda shape what was becoming a genuinely attractive bowl. "Everything worthwhile is," she replied, not looking away from her work. "That's what makes it satisfying when you start to get it right." We were both covered in clay by the time Sarah called for a break. Our attempts sat on the shelf drying, a collection of wobbly bowls and lopsided cups that represented our first steps into completely unfamiliar territory. Linda stood back and looked at her work with an expression I hadn't seen before, something that might have been pride. "I made that," she said, as if she couldn't quite believe it. "I did. And it's beautiful." She looked at me with surprise. "It's completely imperfect. That's what makes it beautiful. It's yours. You made something that didn't exist before." We cleaned up and decided to explore downtown Millbrook while our pieces dried. I had lived here for 5 years, but walking with Linda, I found myself seeing the town through fresh eyes. She noticed things I had stopped seeing: the way morning light hit the brick buildings, the way the old courthouse clock tower cast shadows. That changed throughout the day. The way people greeted each other on the street like they genuinely cared about the answer to "How are you doing?" We ended up at Rosie's Diner, a place I had driven past countless times but never entered. The interior was all red vinyl booths and chrome fixtures, the kind of authentic small-town diner that felt like stepping back in time. A waitress named Dolores, who looked like she had been working there since the Eisenhower administration, seated us by the window and handed us menus with the authority of someone who knew what was good. "First time?" she asked, pencil poised over her order pad. "For both of us," Linda said. "Well then, you're in for a treat. Best pie in 3 counties, and the meatloaf special will change your life." We ordered the meatloaf special and coffee, and settled into the comfortable rhythm of conversation that had been building since our pottery lesson. Linda told me about her work at the hospital, not the stress and responsibility this time, but the moments that reminded her why she had chosen nursing in the first place. The elderly man who always asked about her garden, the young mother she had helped through a difficult recovery, the way it felt to be part of someone's healing. "Love the work," she said, cutting into meatloaf that was, as promised, life-changing. "I really do. It's just that somewhere along the way it became the only thing I did. Work, sleep, repeat." "What did you used to do for fun?" "David and I used to cook together. Not just making dinner, but really cooking. We'd pick a cuisine we'd never tried and spend a whole weekend learning to make it properly. Indian food, Thai food, Moroccan food. We turned our kitchen into a laboratory." Her face lit up as she talked about those weekend cooking adventures. I could see glimpses of who she had been before. Grief and responsibility had narrowed her world to the essential tasks of survival. "When's the last time you cooked something just for the joy of it?" She thought about this. "I honestly can't remember. I've been living on things that can be made quickly after a 12-hour shift. Pasta, sandwiches, takeout, a shame. Cooking is one of the best ways to take care of yourself. I keep telling myself I'll get back to it, but then Saturday comes and I'm too tired, or I tell myself it's wasteful to cook elaborate meals for one person." I understood that logic. but I also understood that it was the kind of thinking that slowly shrinks your world until you're living in the smallest possible version of your life. What if it wasn't just for one person? She looked at me questioningly. I mean, what if we cooked something together? Picked a cuisine neither of us has tried and spent an afternoon figuring it out? The suggestion hung between us, and I could see her weighing it against all the practical reasons why it wasn't necessary, wasn't efficient, wasn't something she should spend time on. I don't even know what I'd choose, she said finally. What sounds good when you think about flavors you've never experienced? She was quiet for a moment, then smiled in a way that made her look younger. Ethiopian food. I've always been curious about Ethiopian food, but there's nowhere around here that serves it. Perfect. Ethiopian food it is. You don't even know what that involves. Neither do you. That's what makes it an adventure. We finished lunch and walked back to the pottery studio to check on our pieces. The bowls and cups had dried enough to be handled, and Sarah showed us how to trim the bottoms and smooth. Any rough edges? Linda worked with quiet concentration, clearly enjoying the process of refining her creation. These will need to dry for another week before the first firing, Sarah explained. Then you can decide if you want to glaze them for a second firing. I'd like that, Linda said immediately. I want to see it finished. So we prepared to leave. Sarah handed us each a small piece of clay. Take these home. Play with them. See what wants to emerge when you're not thinking about making anything specific? Outside the studio, Linda stood holding her small piece of clay like it was something precious. I can't believe how much I enjoyed that. You were good at it. I felt good at it. I felt like myself, but a version of myself I haven't met. Before, she looked at me with an expression that was part gratitude, part bewilderment. Is this what it feels like to have a hobby? I laughed. I think so. Something you do just because you enjoy it, not because anyone needs you to do it. We walked to our cars, and I was about to say goodbye when Linda surprised me. Jake, can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you doing this? I mean, you fixed my garage door, which was your job. But the pottery class, lunch, offering? To cook Ethiopian food with me. Why are you spending time with someone you barely know? It was a fair question, and one I had been asking myself. The honest answer was complicated, involving my own recent history of feeling stuck. My recognition of someone else struggling with the same things I had struggled with, and something less definable that had to do with the way Linda approached the world with such careful attention. Because I said, choosing my words carefully, I think you're at a turning point. And I remember what it was like to be at a turning point and not have anyone notice. She nodded slowly. When was your turning point? When my truck broke. Down in front of Peterson's garage 5 years ago. I was driving to a job interview for work I didn't want in a city where I didn't want to live. And instead, I ended up helping Mr. Peterson fix his gate. One small decision led to another, and suddenly I was living a completely different life. Do you regret it? Not for a second. But I almost didn't make the first choice. I almost just sat in that waiting room and ignored Mr. Peterson's frustration. With his gate, I paused. Sometimes we need someone to notice we're ready for something different, even when we don't realize it ourselves. Linda stood there holding her piece of clay, and I could see her processing not just what I had said, but what the entire day had meant. The pottery class, the lunch at a new place, the conversation about cooking together. All of it had been practice for the larger question of what it might look like to reclaim some space in her life for joy and discovery. Ethiopian food, she said finally, as if testing how the words felt in her mouth. Ethiopian food, I confirmed. Next Saturday? Next Saturday? As I drove home, I thought about the way Linda had looked when she was working at the pottery wheel. The focused contentment. That came from creating something with her hands. There had been something almost meditative about watching her discover that she could be good at something completely new. Something that had nothing to do with taking care of other people. I also thought about her question about why I was spending time with her, and realized the answer was more complicated than I had admitted. Yes, I recognized someone who needed encouragement to reclaim their life. But there was something else, something about the way she paid attention to the world, the way she approached new experiences with such thoughtful curiosity that made me want to be part of whatever came next. The truth was, I was enjoying her. company in a way that had nothing to do with helping or fixing or being needed. I was enjoying the person she was when she allowed herself to be interested in things, when she forgot to be responsible for a few hours and just existed in the moment. That night, I found myself looking up Ethiopian recipes online, trying to understand what we were committing ourselves to. The cuisine was complex, built around a sourdough flatbread called injera and a variety of spiced stews and vegetables. It would require ingredients I had never heard of and techniques I had never attempted. In other words, it was perfect. Sometimes the best adventures are the ones that force you so far outside your comfort zone that you have no choice but to discover what you're capable of. I fell asleep thinking about Linda's surprised delight when her clay had finally centered on the wheel. The way her whole face had changed when she realized she was creating something beautiful. Tomorrow, I would call her to start planning our Ethiopian cooking adventure. Tonight, I was content to imagine the look on her face when she tasted something she had never experienced before, when she realized that there were still new flavors and new experiences waiting for her to discover them. The phone call came at 11:47 on Thursday night, right in the middle of what was supposed to be a peaceful evening spent researching Berber spice blends and wondering if I could actually find injera flour in Millbrook. Linda's voice on the other end was strained, tired in a way that went deeper than a long shift at the hospital. "Jake, I'm so sorry to call this late. I know it's ridiculous, but I didn't know who else to call." I sat up immediately, alert too. The tone that people use when their carefully maintained world has just taken an unexpected hit. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Physically, I mean. But Emma's coming home tomorrow, unexpectedly. She called an hour ago, said she's driving down from college and should be here by afternoon. She sounded upset about something, but she wouldn't tell me what, just said she needed to come home for a few days." I could hear the worry in her voice, but also something else. The particular strain that comes from suddenly having to shift from one version of yourself to another without warning. That's not ridiculous at all. "You're worried?" "About her, I am, but that's not why I'm calling." She paused, and I could almost hear her gathering courage. "I'm calling because I don't know how to tell her about the pottery class, or about you, or about the fact that, for the first time in 4 years, I was actually looking forward to something that wasn't work." I understood immediately. Linda had been living 2 separate lives for the past week. The responsible, strong, endlessly capable version that everyone expected, and the newer version that was just beginning to explore what it might want beyond obligation. Now those 2 worlds were about to collide. You think she'd disapprove? I think she'd worry. She already thinks I'm isolated, that I don't have enough social connections, that I work too much and don't take care of myself. If I suddenly tell her I'm taking pottery classes and cooking exotic food with a man she's never heard of, Linda's voice trailed off. She might think you're having some kind of breakdown. Exactly. She might think I'm making impulsive decisions because I'm lonely or having a midlife crisis or trying to replace her father with the first man who pays attention to me. I could hear the fear in her voice, the terror of being misunderstood by the person whose opinion mattered most to her. But I could also hear something else. The fear that Emma's arrival would force her back into the smaller version of herself, the one who didn't have hobbies or plans that involved her own happiness. "Linda, can I ask you something?"
Yes.
"Of course. Do you want to cancel Saturday? The Ethiopian food experiment?" It was a long pause, and I found myself holding my breath, realizing that I cared more about her answer than I had expected. "No," she said finally, and there was something fierce in her voice. "I don't want to cancel. I want to learn how to make injera, and I want to taste Berber spice, and I want to feel like the person I was last. Saturday, when I was covered in clay and laughing at your terrible pottery attempts, then we don't cancel. But what do I tell Emma? You tell her the truth. That you're learning new things and meeting new people and discovering parts of yourself you forgot existed. What if she thinks I'm losing my mind? Then maybe she needs to expand her idea of what your life can look like." Friday afternoon, I was in my garage organizing tools and trying not to think about Linda's family reunion when I heard car doors slamming in her driveway. Through my window, I could see a young woman with Linda's dark hair and purposeful walk pulling suitcases from the trunk of a small sedan. Emma was home. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "Jake, Linda's voice was tight with stress. Could you possibly come over? Emma wants to meet you. That was fast. I told her about Saturday, about cooking together. She has questions. I could imagine the questions, and none of them were likely to be comfortable. Linda had sounded like she needed backup, and after our conversation the night before, I wasn't about to leave her to navigate this alone. I walked across the street feeling like I was going to a job interview where I didn't know what position I was applying for. Emma answered the door before I could knock, and I immediately understood where Linda got her ability to assess situations. Quickly, Emma looked me over with a kind of clinical attention that suggested she had inherited her mother's diagnostic skills. You must be Jake, she said, extending her hand with professional politeness. Emma Henderson. Thank you for helping my mom with the garage door. Nice to meet you, Emma. Your mom speaks about you all the time. Linda appeared behind Emma, looking like someone caught between two worlds she wasn't sure how to reconcile. Jake, would you like some coffee? We were just talking about weekend plans. Settled in Linda's living room? Emma taking the chair across from me with the strategic positioning of someone conducting an interview. Linda perched on the edge of the couch, clearly nervous about what was coming next. So Mom tells me you two are planning to cook Ethiopian food tomorrow, Emma said, her tone carefully neutral. That's quite a departure from her usual routine. Your mom mentioned she and your dad used to experiment with different cuisines. I thought it might be nice to revive that tradition. Emma's expression flickered with something I couldn't quite read. She told you about that. She did. She seemed to have happy memories of those weekend cooking adventures. They were some of the best times we had as a family, Emma said softly, and I caught a glimpse of the worry beneath her professional demeanor. After Dad died, she stopped cooking like that. She stopped doing a lot of things that used to make her happy. I looked at Linda, who was staring at her hands, and realized that this conversation was about much more than Ethiopian food or pottery classes. This was about a daughter who had been watching her mother disappear into a smaller and smaller version of herself, and who was now unsure whether this sudden expansion was healing or concerning. Emma, Linda said quietly, Jake isn't trying to replace your father. He's just a friend who's helping me remember that I'm allowed to have interests outside of work. I know that, Mom. I'm not worried about Dad's memory. I'm worried about you. The honesty in Emma's voice caught me off guard. She wasn't being protective because she disapproved of change. She was being protective because she cared. What specifically worries you? I asked, genuinely curious. Emma looked at me like she was deciding whether I could handle the truth. My mom has spent the last 4 years being the strongest person I know. She worked extra shifts to pay for Dad's medical bills and my college tuition. She never complained, never asked for help, never let anyone see her fall apart, but I could see how much it was costing her. She turned to Linda. You think I don't notice, but I do. The way you sound tired even when you're rested. The way you talk about work like it's the only thing that matters. The way you've made yourself so small and so careful that you've forgotten you're allowed to want things. Linda's eyes filled with tears, and I could see that Emma had hit something fundamental. So when you call me and tell me you're taking pottery classes and planning cooking experiments with someone I've never heard of, part of me is thrilled, Emma continued. But part of me is terrified that you're going to expand too fast and then crash when reality sets in. The room was quiet for a moment, all of us sitting with the weight of Emma's honesty. Then Linda spoke, her voice steady despite the tears. Emma, honey, I understand your concern, but I think I've been crashed for a long time. I think what you're seeing now isn't me falling apart. It's me trying to put myself back together. Emma looked between her mother and me, and I could see her reassessing the situation. You really think cooking Ethiopian food is going to help with that? I think doing something just because I want to, something that has nothing to do with taking care of anyone else or being responsible for anything, might help me remember who I am when I'm not at work, Linda said. I decided to take a risk. Emma, your mom is one of the most thoughtful people I've ever met. She approaches everything from garage door repairs to pottery wheels with this incredible attention and care. I don't think she's capable of making reckless decisions, even when she's trying to. Emma studied me for a long moment, then surprised me by smiling. She's pretty great, isn't she? She really is. But you're really just friends. We're really just friends. Friends who are helping each other figure out what comes next, Linda added, Emma nodded slowly. Okay, but I have one condition. What's that? Linda asked. I want to help with the Ethiopian food tomorrow. I've never cooked Ethiopian food either, and if you're going to have a culinary disaster, I want to be part of it. The relief on Linda's face was immediate and profound. You want to join us? I want to join you. But fair warning, I'm going to ask Jake embarrassing questions about his intentions all day. I can handle embarrassing questions, I said. We'll see. Emma grinned, and suddenly she looked much more like her mother. That evening, the three of us sat around Linda's kitchen table, with laptops and Ethiopian cookbooks, planning our weekend adventure. Emma proved to be as methodical as her mother, researching traditional spice combinations and cooking techniques with the thoroughness of someone writing a research paper. This is more complicated than I expected, she said, scrolling through a recipe for Dora Watt. We're going to need to make our own Berber spice blend from scratch. Is that a problem? Linda asked. Not a problem, just ambitious. We're talking about a day-long cooking project here. I looked at Linda, wondering if the reality of the undertaking would make her reconsider. Instead, she looked more excited than I had seen her yet. Good, she said. I haven't had a project that required a whole day in years. Emma looked at her mother with something that might have been pride. Okay then, Ethiopian feast it is, but we're getting backup pizza, just in case. Deal, Linda and I said simultaneously. Later, after Emma had gone to bed and I was preparing to leave, Linda walked me to the door. Thank you, she said quietly. For today, for backing me up, for not running away when my daughter interrogated you like you were applying for security clearance. She's protecting you. I respect that. She's also giving me permission to change, which is something I didn't. No, I needed. Linda paused. Jake, can I tell you something? Always. For the first time in 4 years, I'm excited about a weekend. Not dreading it, not trying to get through it, but actually looking forward to it. That feels like a miracle. I understood. What she meant? Sometimes the smallest shifts feel like seismic changes when you've been stuck in place for too long. It's going to be a good day tomorrow, I said, even if we completely mess up the food, especially if we completely mess up the food. As I walked home, I thought about the way Emma had looked at her mother when Linda talked about wanting to remember who she was outside of work. There had been recognition there, and relief, like someone who had been waiting for their parent to come back to life and was finally seeing signs of resurrection. Saturday was going to be interesting. 3 people, a kitchen full of unfamiliar ingredients, and the simple goal of creating something delicious together. It sounded like exactly the kind of beautiful disaster that changes everything. Saturday. Morning arrived with the smell of roasting spices and the sound of Linda's laughter drifting through her. Open kitchen windows. I knocked on her door at 9 o'clock sharp, carrying a bag of ingredients we'd managed to track down at 3 different grocery stores and one specialty market 2 towns over. Emma answered the door wearing an apron that said, "Kiss the cook," and a grin that suggested she was already enjoying herself. Jake. Perfect timing. Mom's been up since 6 reading Ethiopian cooking blogs like she's studying for finals. Linda emerged from the kitchen with flour in her hair and an expression of determined joy. I've been practicing the injera technique. I think I'm getting the hang of it, but we might want to have backup flatbread just in case. The kitchen was already a beautiful disaster. Spices covered every counter, creating a landscape of small bowls filled with cardamom, fenugreek, coriander, and a dozen other aromatics I couldn't identify. The air was thick with the earthy, complex scent, a Berber spice blend that Linda had apparently been toasting since dawn. This smells incredible already, I said, surveying the organized chaos. It smells like adventure, Emma said, tying an apron around my waist with mock seriousness. Fair warning, we've decided to make enough food for a small village. Excited about the menu planning? I may have gotten carried away, Linda admitted, but she didn't look apologetic. She looked alive in a way I hadn't seen before, energized by the prospect of creating something elaborate and unnecessary and purely for the joy of it. We spent the morning working in comfortable chaos. Emma proved to be as methodical as her mother, but with a lightness that kept us all laughing when things went wrong. Linda approached each recipe with the focus of someone performing surgery, determined to understand not just what to do, but why each step mattered. The injure proved to be more challenging than any of us had anticipated. The fermented batter had a mind of its own, and our first few attempts resulted in what could generously be called pancakes with identity issues. Linda was undeterred, adjusting technique and temperature with patient persistence until she produced something that actually resembled the spongy, slightly sour flatbread we were aiming for. "Mom, you're a genius," Emma said, testing a piece of properly cooked injera. "This actually tastes right." "Beginner's luck," Linda said, but her smile suggested she knew it was more than that. By afternoon, we had created a feast that would have impressed any Ethiopian grandmother. Dora Watt simmered on the stove, rich with Berber spice and tender chicken. Vegetarian dishes filled every remaining burner: split lentils with ginger, collard greens with garlic, spiced cabbage, and carrots. The kitchen smelled like a spice market, and we were all covered in evidence of our ambitious project. "I can't believe we actually pulled this off," Emma said, surveying our accomplishment with obvious pride. "We haven't tasted it yet," Linda pointed out, but she was beaming. We arranged everything on Linda's dining room table, spreading the injera like a tablecloth and spooning the various stews and vegetables on top in colorful mounds. It looked nothing like anything any of us had ever made before, which seemed exactly right. The first bite was a revelation. The Berber spice blend we'd spent hours perfecting was complex and warming, with layers of heat and sweetness that evolved as you ate. The injera provided the perfect base, its slight sourness balancing the rich stews. We ate with our hands, the way the recipes instructed, sharing food directly from the communal platter. "This is incredible," Emma said, her eyes wide with surprise. "I mean, I knew it would be good, but this is restaurant-quality food." "It's better than restaurant food," Linda said, "because we made it ourselves." I watched Linda as she ate, saw the pure satisfaction on her face as she tasted flavors she had never experienced before, flavors she had created with her own hands. This was what joy looked like when it was earned through effort and shared with people who mattered. "Mom," Emma said suddenly, "I owe you an apology." Linda looked up surprised. "For what?" "For worrying that you were making impulsive decisions, for thinking that you needed protection from change." Emma paused, gathering her thoughts. "Watching you today, seeing how happy you are when you're creating something and learning something and just being yourself, I realized I was trying to keep you safe from exactly the thing you needed most." Linda's eyes filled with tears, but they were the good kind. "Emma, honey, you were protecting me because you love me. I understand that. But you don't need protection from having a life. You need encouragement to have a bigger life." I felt like I was witnessing something important. The moment when a family relationship shifted to accommodate growth instead of limiting it. "Jake," Emma said, turning to me, "thank you for seeing what my mom needed before she saw it herself." "I didn't do anything special," I said. "Just recognized someone who was ready for something different." "That's exactly what you did," Linda said quietly. "You saw possibility when I had forgotten that possibility existed." We spent the rest of the afternoon eating and talking and marveling at what we had accomplished together. Emma told stories about college, about the pre-med program that was challenging her in ways she loved, about the life she was building for herself. Linda talked about work in a different way than I had heard before, focusing on the connections with patients rather than the endless responsibilities. As the sun began to set, Emma announced that she needed to drive back to campus that evening. For a study group the next morning, we packed up leftover food for her to take, enough Ethiopian cuisine to feed her dormitory floor. "This was exactly what I needed," she said, hugging her mother goodbye. "And not just the food. I needed too. See you like this? Excited about something that's just for you?" After Emma left, Linda and I cleaned up the kitchen in comfortable silence. The day had been more successful than any of us had dared to hope, but it had also been something larger. Proof that Linda was capable of creating the kind of life she wanted, not just managing the life she had been given. "I keep thinking about what Emma said," Linda said, washing the last of the dishes, "about needing encouragement to have a bigger life instead of protection from change. It's a good point. Sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who have the hardest time letting us grow. But you didn't do that. From the beginning, you encouraged me to try things, to want things, to take up space in my own life. She turned to face me, her hands still damp from the dishwater. Why? I thought about that question. About the real answer that went beyond simple kindness or recognizing someone who needed encouragement. Because, I said, watching you discover what you're capable of, watching you light up when you're creating something or learning something new, it reminds me why life is worth paying attention to. Linda stepped closer, and for a moment I thought she might kiss me. Instead, she did something better. She smiled, the kind of smile that comes from deep contentment, from knowing exactly where you are and being grateful to be there. "Jake Morrison," she said, "I think you might have saved my life." "Linda Henderson," I replied, "I think you might have saved mine right back." 3 months later, Linda's pottery pieces filled a shelf in her kitchen. Perfect and beautiful reminders of Saturday mornings spent creating something with her hands. We had worked our way through Thai cuisine, Moroccan tagines, and an ambitious attempt at French pastry that resulted in what we generously called rustic tarts. Emma visited monthly, always eager to hear about our latest culinary adventure and increasingly convinced that her mother had found exactly the kind of balance she needed. Linda still worked her shifts at the hospital, still cared for her patients with the same dedication, but she also had pottery classes on Wednesdays, cooking experiments on weekends, and a life that extended beyond the walls of the ICU. As for me, I discovered that fixing things was about more than garage doors and broken gates. Sometimes it was about helping someone remember that they were allowed to want more than just getting through each day. Sometimes it was about learning that the most important repairs happen when people give each other permission to change. The garage door, by the way, has never given Linda another moment of trouble. But I still drive by her house every morning on my way to work, just to make sure everything is running smoothly. Old habits, I suppose. Good ones. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.